Hello there, and welcome to Deep Earth Stories. Get comfortable. Turn the lights down if you can. Because what we are about to explore together has been waiting a very, very long time for someone to listen. But before that, tell me in comments where are you listening from and what time is there right now, and please subscribe to my channel. Tonight we begin somewhere quiet. Maybe you're already lying down. Maybe the lights are low or off completely. Maybe there's a soft sound somewhere nearby. A fan turning, rain on a window, the distant hum of a city that never fully sleeps. Whatever is around you right now, let it be there. You do not need to move. You do not need to do anything at all. Just breathe in slowly and breathe out. You're safe here. You're warm. And for the next little while, I'm going to tell you a story. A very old story. In fact, it may be the oldest kind of story there is. The kind that asks a simple question about where we all came from and what the people before us really knew. Tonight, we're going to drift together through something that has quietly fascinated historians, scientists, archaeologists, and dreamers for a very long time. We're going to ask a gentle question. Not a frightening one, not a sharp one, just a soft, wondering kind of question. What if the ancient humans who lived thousands and thousands of years ago were far more intelligent, far more creative, and far more capable than most of us were ever taught to believe? What if the story we learned, the one that goes from simple cave people slowly becoming smarter over long periods of time, is only part of the picture? What if there are pieces missing? What if the past is deeper, richer, and more surprising than the neat little timeline we were shown in school? You do not need to decide anything tonight. You do not need to figure anything out. All I want you to do is listen. Let the words pass over you like slow water. If your eyes are already closed, that is perfect. If you feel a yawn coming, let it come. If your thoughts begin to drift away from the story and into your own dreams, that is more than okay. The world is very old, and the people who lived in it before us were very real. They looked up at the same stars you might look at on a clear night. They felt the cold wind. They held their children. They wondered about the same sky that stretches above you right now. Let us drift back together. Let us go slowly, gently, into the deep past. There is no rush. The night is long, and the story is waiting for us. Chapter 1. The oldest question. Close your eyes for a moment, if they are not already closed. Imagine you're standing somewhere open. Maybe a wide, grassy plain, the kind that seems to stretch all the way to the curve of the earth. The sky above you is enormous. The sun is low, burning a soft orange near the horizon. There are no buildings anywhere, no roads, no sounds of machines or traffic. Just wind and grass bending slowly in it, and somewhere in the distance the sound of water moving over stones. You're not alone. Somewhere nearby there is a small fire, and sitting around that fire there are people. They are not so different from you. They have the same kind of hands, the same eyes, the same general shape that you would recognize in any person you passed on the street today. They are talking, quietly, in low voices. Some of them are eating. One of them is watching the sky, the way you sometimes watch a screen without really watching it. Just thinking, just drifting, just being. One of them has picked up a stone, not to throw it, just to hold it, to feel its weight. To notice perhaps that this particular stone has an edge that is a little sharper than the others. And something happens in that moment. A small, quiet spark of something that does not quite have a name, a realization, a connection. That person turns the stone over in their hand and begins very carefully to shape it. This is a scene that happened many times in many places over a very long stretch of human history. It is the kind of scene that scientists and historians use to mark the beginning of what we call human intelligence. The ability to take a thing and make it into something better. The ability to plan ahead, to imagine what something could be, instead of only seeing what it already is. But here is the gentle question I want us to sit with tonight. What if that spark, that quiet, brilliant moment of understanding, happened much earlier than we think? What if human beings, or the people who came before us, were doing complicated, remarkable things at a time so far back that most of us cannot even fully picture it? This question has been asked before, of course. It is not a new question, but it is a question that keeps coming back quietly. Every time someone digs into the earth and finds something that does not quite fit the story we thought we knew. Tonight, we are going to explore that question together. We're going to travel through time, gently, slowly, and look at some of the most surprising, most beautiful, most quietly mysterious things that have ever been found or studied about the ancient human world. Some of what I tell you tonight is solid, well-accepted science. Some of it is newer discovery that scientists are still working to understand, and some of it is in that soft middle space, the place where known facts meet genuine wonder. I will always tell you which is which. There's no need to worry or feel uncertain. The mystery here is a warm kind of mystery, the kind that makes you feel small and amazed, not afraid. For now, just let your body relax a little more. Let your shoulders settle. Let your jaw unclench if it was clenched. Let your hands rest. We're going back a long way, and the going will be slow and easy. Let us begin. Chapter 2. A much longer story. Most of us were taught, at some point in our lives, a version of human history that looked something like this. Long ago, humans were simple. They lived in caves. They used basic tools. They hunted animals and gathered plants. Slowly, over thousands of years, they got a little smarter. They learned to farm. They built villages, then towns, then cities. They developed writing and mathematics and art and science. And eventually, after a very long climb, they arrived at the modern world. This is not a wrong story exactly. Many parts of it are true, or true enough. But it is a very short and simple version of something that is actually much, much more complicated. And in the gaps of that simple story, in the spaces between what we were told, there are some remarkable things hiding. One of the first things that surprises many people when they begin to look more closely at ancient human history is just how long that history actually is. When we talk about ancient history, most people picture things like the pyramids of Egypt, or the Roman Empire, or perhaps the ancient Greeks. These feel very old to us, and they are old, several thousand years old. The pyramids of Giza were built roughly 4,500 years ago. That is a very long time ago by any ordinary measure. But here is the thing. Modern humans, people who looked and thought very much like you and me, have been on this earth for somewhere between 200,000 and 300,000 years. Some estimates push that number even further back. Think about that for a moment. If modern human history is 200,000 years long, and recorded history, the part with writing and cities and official records, is only about 5,000 or 6,000 years long, then there are nearly 200,000 years of human life that we know almost nothing about. 200,000 years. That is not a small gap. That is an enormous amount of time. That is longer than most of us can truly picture. If you tried to count to 200,000, one number per second, it would take you more than 2 days without stopping. What were people doing during all that time? What did they know? What did they build? What do they understand about the world around them? We do not have written records from those years. We have no books, no libraries, no stone tablets with instructions carved into them. What we have instead are fragments, small, quiet pieces of physical evidence that have survived thousands of years buried in the earth or hidden under water or preserved in dry desert air. And some of those fragments are very, very surprising. Let us drift into the first of them. Chapter 3. The Art in the Dark. Imagine, if you will, a narrow passage underground. The air is cool and still. It smells of stone and something old. Something so old it does not have a word. The only light comes from a small flame you're carrying. It flickers and dances, making the shadows move on the rough walls around you. You're walking deeper into the earth. The tunnel narrows. You have to duck your head in places. Your footsteps are soft on the stone floor. There is no sound except your own breathing and the very faint echo of your movements. And then the tunnel opens. Suddenly you are in a chamber. The ceiling is high above you, higher than you expected. The flame in your hand lifts and steadies in the wider space. And as your eyes adjust, you see the walls. They are covered in paintings. Not crude scratches or simple marks. Real paintings. Animals in motion. Horses with legs stretched out in full gallop. Bison with heavy shoulders and lowered heads. Deer turning to look at something behind them. The lines are fluid and confident, made by a hand that knew exactly what it was doing. The shapes are full of life, of movement, of something that feels remarkably like art in the truest sense of the word. You're standing in a place like the Lascaux Cave in France, or the Altamira Cave in Spain, or any one of dozens of similar sites scattered across Europe and other parts of the world. These paintings were made by human beings, real, thinking, feeling human beings who lived somewhere between 17,000 and 40,000 years ago. 17,000 to 40,000 years ago. These are not the works of someone who was barely getting by, barely surviving, barely thinking. These are the works of someone who cared deeply about beauty, about representation, about capturing something true and moving about the world they lived in. Scientists who study these paintings have found that the artist understood perspective, the way objects look slightly different depending on where you're standing. They mix pigments with precision, using ochres and charcoal and minerals to create colours that have lasted tens of thousands of years. Some of the paintings even use the natural curves of the rock wall to give the animals a three-dimensional quality, as if the bison is actually pushing out of the stone. That is not simple survival. That is art. That is creativity. That is a mind at work in ways that feel very familiar to us, even across the enormous distance of time. But here is where it gets even gentler and more surprising. In 2018, researchers studying a cave in Sulawesi, Indonesia, discovered paintings that were even older than the famous European cave art. A hand stencil, made by pressing a hand against the wall and blowing pigment around it, was dated to at least 40,000 years old, and nearby, a painting of a pig-like animal was later dated to be around 45,500 years old. And then, in 2021, a new discovery in that same region pushed the date even further. A painting of a warty pig was found to be at least 45,500 years, possibly older. At the time of writing this, it was among the oldest figurative art that represents a real living thing ever found. But here is the softest and most surprising part of all this. Even before any cave painting, long before any of the art we have been able to date and study clearly, there is evidence that human beings, or our very close ancestors, were making marks on purpose, making patterns, showing something that looks, very gently, like symbolic thinking. In a cave in South Africa called Blombos Cave, researchers found small pieces of ochre, a reddish-brown mineral, with geometric patterns scratched into them. Lines and cross-hatch marks, careful and deliberate. These pieces are estimated to be around 73,000 years old. Some estimates say even older. 73,000 years ago, someone sat down with a piece of ochre and a tool and made a careful pattern, not because they had to, not because it helped them survive in any direct way, but because something in them wanted to make a mark, wanted to create something that had meaning. That is a mind very much like yours. For a moment, just breathe. Notice the weight of your body resting wherever you are resting. Feel the softness of the surface beneath you. Let that thought about the ochre and the ancient hand drift slowly through your mind like a leaf on still water. Someone made that pattern 73,000 years ago. And we are still here, still wondering about it, still finding it beautiful. There is something very peaceful about that, if you let yourself feel it. Chapter 4. The world they lived in. Let us step back for a moment from the caves and the paintings and think about the world that ancient humans actually lived in. Because one of the things that helps us understand just how capable they were is understanding how extraordinary the world around them was and how well they learned to navigate it. The world of 40 or 50,000 years ago was not exactly the same as our world today. The climate was different. Parts of what is now ocean were dry land. Parts of what is now warm and green were covered in ice. The animals were different too, strange and enormous creatures that we would barely recognize today. There were woolly mammoths, of course, the great shaggy elephants of the cold north, with long curved tusks and thick fur coats. There were cave lions bigger than any lion alive today. There were giant ground sloths in the Americas, creatures that stood as tall as a modern elephant when they reared up on their hind legs. There were short-faced bears, whose legs were long and fast, who could run as quickly as a horse. And in the middle of all of this, in this wild, enormous, dangerous, beautiful world, there were human beings. Small, relatively slow, without claws or thick fur or natural armor of any kind. And yet, they thrived. They spread. They crossed oceans and mountain ranges and frozen plains. They adapted again and again and again to conditions that would challenge any living creature on Earth. How did they do it? The answer, most scientists agree, was the human brain. The ability to communicate, to plan, to share knowledge across generations, to tell stories, to pass down information not just through instinct and genetics, but through language and memory and teaching. Think about that for a moment. Every piece of knowledge that early humans accumulated, where the best water sources were, which plants were safe to eat, how to read the sky for weather, where the animals went during different seasons, all of that had to be remembered and shared, person to person, generation to generation, for thousands and thousands of years before anyone wrote anything down. And they did it. They did it remarkably well. We know this because of what they left behind. Not just art, but tools. And the tools tell a story of their own. The stone tools made by early humans are far more sophisticated than the popular image of a caveman banging rocks together. By around 40,000 years ago, toolmakers in various parts of the world were creating blades that were thin, precise, and carefully shaped. They were hafting, which means attaching stone blades to wooden handles, creating spears and knives that were far more effective than a simple held stone. They were using materials from far away, which tells us they were either travelling great distances or trading with other groups of people. Trading. Long-distance trade among people who had no cities, no writing, no currency. And yet, when archaeologists find materials in an ancient site that could only have come from hundreds of miles away, trade is one of the most reasonable explanations. Shells from distant coasts found in inland campsites. Obsidian, a sharp volcanic glass used for cutting tools, found far from any volcano. These things had to travel somehow, and the most likely answer is that they travelled through networks of human connection, handed from person to person, group to group across the land. Networks of connection. among people we once imagined as isolated, solitary, barely getting by. As we drift through these thoughts together, let the images settle softly in your mind. A group of people sitting together under an enormous open sky, sharing food, sharing stories, passing something small and precious from one hand to the next, a shell, a stone, something that came from far away and carries with it the invisible thread of a long human chain. It is a gentle kind of wonder when you let yourself rest in it. Let your breathing slow just a little more. If your eyes are heavy, let them close completely. You do not need to hold on to every word. The story will carry on softly around you. Chapter 5. The Builders Before History. Now, I want to take you somewhere that many people have heard of, but perhaps not thought about deeply enough. Because there is a place in the world that quietly rewrites one of our most basic assumptions about ancient human capability. That place is called Göbekli Tepe, and it is in the southeastern part of modern-day Turkey. Picture a hillside, dry and golden in the afternoon light, not far from the fertile plains where, thousands of years later, some of the earliest known farming communities would grow up. The air is warm and dusty. There are no trees close by, just low scrub and rock, and the wide blue sky stretching in every direction. Beneath that hillside, buried under layers of earth that had accumulated over thousands and thousands of years, there was something waiting. In the 1990s, archaeologists began excavating this site. What they found there changed the way many scientists think about the origins of human civilization. Göbekli Tepe is a complex of large circular stone structures. Each structure is made up of T-shaped stone pillars, some of them up to 6 meters tall and weighing up to 20 tons each, arranged in circular patterns and connected by low stone walls. The pillars are carved, not just shaped, but decorated with detailed carvings of animals. Foxes, snakes, boars, birds, lions, scorpions, spiders. The carvings are intricate and clearly the work of skilled, practiced hands. And the date of this place? Göbekli Tepe was built approximately 11,000 to 12,000 years ago. 12,000 years ago. Now, why does that number matter so much? Because 12,000 years ago, according to the story we were taught in school, human beings were not yet building things like this. They were not supposed to be. The standard timeline of human civilization places the beginning of large-scale building, organized religion, and monumental architecture at around 5,000 or 6,000 years ago. The time of the earliest Mesopotamian cities and the earliest Egyptian structures. Göbekli Tepe is twice as old as that, and here is the detail that makes it even more remarkable. The people who built Göbekli Tepe were not farmers. There is no evidence of farming at the site. By all indications, the builders were hunter-gatherers, people who move from place to place following food, living off the land, exactly the kind of people the old story told us were too simple and too busy surviving to build something like this. And yet, they organised. They gathered in significant numbers. They quarried enormous stones. They transported those stones over difficult terrain. They carved them with skill and care. They arranged them in precise, deliberate patterns. And then, at some point, they buried the whole complex intentionally, filling it in with earth and rubble, as if putting it away or preserving it. Why did they build it? We do not know for certain. The most common theory is that it was a religious or ceremonial site, a gathering place for spiritual purposes. Some researchers have pointed to the orientation of the pillars and suggested they may have been aligned with certain stars or constellations, though this is still debated and not fully agreed upon. But the reason matters less than the fact itself. 12,000 years ago, a group of people with no cities, no writing, no formal government as far as we know, built something that required enormous planning, social organisation, skilled craftsmanship and collective effort, something that would outlast them by thousands of years. That is not what we were told hunter-gatherers could do, and Göbekli Tepe is not alone. As excavations continue, not just at that site, but at nearby areas and at other sites around the world, it becomes increasingly clear that the old story, the neat and simple timeline, has more gaps and more complications than most of us knew. This does not mean the past was full of lost super civilizations or mysterious vanished peoples with impossible technology. It is important to say that clearly and gently. We do not need to reach for the dramatic or the sensational to find something truly amazing here. The truth is remarkable enough on its own. What it does mean is that human beings, for a very long time before recorded history, were thinking deeply. Were organizing, were creating things of beauty and meaning and practical sophistication, in ways, and at times, that we're only beginning to understand. Let that sit with you softly as we move toward the end of this first part of our journey. The world is very old, and the people in it have always been reaching toward understanding, toward beauty, toward something larger than themselves. Just like you, perhaps, lying in the quiet dark, reaching toward sleep. Chapter 6. The language we cannot hear. There's another piece of this picture that I find deeply, quietly moving, and that is the question of language. We do not have any recordings of ancient human language. Obviously, no one was making recordings tens of thousands of years ago. And because language is made of sound, and sound disappears the moment it is made, we cannot dig it up the way we can dig up bones and tools and carved stone. But language leaves traces, indirect ones, and those traces tell us something extraordinary. The physical structures needed to produce complex language, the shape of the throat, the position of the larynx, the structure of the tongue and mouth, are present in modern humans and appear to have been present in our species for a very long time. The hyoid bone, a small horseshoe-shaped bone in the throat that plays an important role in speech, has been found in ancient human remains going back hundreds of thousands of years, looking very similar to our own. This doesn't prove that ancient humans spoke as we do. It cannot. But it suggests that the physical capability was there, very early, earlier perhaps than the simple timeline would have us believe. And there is something else. There is the question of what language is for, what it does, why it exists. Language is not just a practical tool, though it is certainly that. Language is the vehicle for everything abstract in human life. Stories, songs, prayers, plans, memories, dreams. Everything we are as human beings, everything that makes us rich and complex and capable of building Göbekli Tepe or painting a horse on a cave wall by firelight, all of it runs on language. And if language was there, even in simpler early forms very far back in human history, then so was all the rest of it. The richness, the depth, the capacity for wonder. There were people, hundreds of thousands of years ago, who sat together and told stories. We will never hear those stories. They are gone as completely as the smoke from those ancient fires, drifted away into an air that has long since changed and moved and carried it into nothing. But they were told. They existed. Somewhere in the deep, warm dark of the ancient past, someone told a story to someone they loved, and that someone listened and felt safe. That is not so different from what is happening right now, in this quiet night, as you listen and let yourself drift. For a moment, just breathe. Feel the ground beneath you, steady and solid. Feel the air around you, soft and still. You're part of a very long line of people who have laid down and listened to voices in the dark and let themselves rest. You are safe. The night is gentle, the story will still be here. We have walked a long way together in this first part of our journey. We have stood on an ancient plain and watched fire. We have moved through underground passages and seen paintings made by hands like ours. We have thought about the world those people lived in, enormous and wild and full of creatures that no longer exist. We have stood at Göbekli Tepe and felt the quiet shock of a building 12,000 years old, made by people who are not supposed to be able to make it. And we have thought about the language they spoke, the stories they told, the invisible thread of human voice that stretches all the way back into a darkness we can never fully see. In the parts of this story that follow, we're going to go even deeper. We're going to look at more discoveries, more quiet mysteries, more gentle surprises from the ancient world. We're going to ask the question again and again in different ways and different places. What if they were more advanced than we think? We are going deeper now, into more of what the ancient world left behind, into more of the quiet evidence that keeps asking us gently to reconsider what we thought we knew. Chapter 7: The Stars Above. Ancient Eyes. Imagine you are lying on your back on open ground. The earth is cool beneath you, the grass is soft. Above you the sky is enormous. And because there are no electric lights anywhere on Earth tonight, no cities, no street lamps, no glowing screens, the sky is absolutely full of stars. Not the handful of bright stars you might see from a modern city on a clear night. Not the scattered few that manage to shine through the orange glow of a light pollution. The whole sky, every star, thousands and thousands of them, packed so closely in some places that they blur into soft rivers of light. The Milky Way stretches from one horizon to the other like a band of pale silk, luminous and vast. This is the sky that ancient humans saw every single night of their lives. Not sometimes, not on special occasions when they travelled far from the city. Every night. From childhood to old age, every person who lived before the age of electric light fell asleep under this sky and woke up under it and spent their evenings beneath it. It was simply the world, the ceiling of everything, as familiar and present as the ground beneath their feet. And they watched it. Carefully. Over long, long periods of time. We know this because of what they built and how they built it. And Göbekli Tepe is only one example. Across the world, in many different cultures and many different time periods, ancient people constructed things that were aligned, with great precision, with events in the sky. Stonehenge, in England, is perhaps the most famous example. Those massive standing stones, arranged in a circle on a wide flat plain, were placed so that on the morning of the summer solstice, the longest day of the year, the rising sun shines in a direct line through the main entrance of the monument, illuminating the central altar stone. This alignment was not accidental. To achieve it, whoever designed Stonehenge needed a deep understanding of how the sun moves across the sky throughout the year, and how that movement changes depending on your position on Earth. Stonehenge was built in stages, with the earliest parts going back about 5,000 years. That is already very old, older than many people realise. But the astronomical knowledge it represents goes back even further than its construction. The understanding had to come first. The watching and the measuring and the recording passed down through generations before anyone placed the first stone. And Stonehenge is just one of many such structures. There are stone circles and standing stones scattered across Europe, the Middle East and beyond, many of them oriented towards significant solar or lunar events. There is the Nabta Playa stone circle in the Sahara Desert, now a dry and desolate place, but once a lake region, which appears to be oriented to the summer solstice and has been dated to around 7,000 years ago. There are the ancient Egyptian temples, many of which were carefully aligned so that sunlight would enter through specific doorways on specific days of the year, bathing the innermost statue in light on a god's feast day, or on the king's birthday, with an accuracy that required precise astronomical calculation. There is Newgrange, a great mound of stone and earth in Ireland, built about 5,000 years ago, with a narrow roof box above its entrance designed to let in a beam of sunlight for just a few minutes on the morning of the winter solstice, the shortest day of the year. The beam travels down a long narrow passageway and lights up the chamber at the heart of the mound. Only on that one morning, only for those few minutes, and then the darkness returns. Think about what it took to build that. Not just the physical labour of moving enormous stones into position, though that alone is staggering. But the knowledge. Someone had to watch the winter solstice sunrise for many years, possibly many generations. They had to note exactly where on the horizon the sun appeared. They had to design a structure that would channel light from that precise spot on the horizon through a passage many meters long to a specific point inside. And they had to get it right, the first time, because once those massive stones were in place, moving them was essentially impossible. They got it right. 5,000 years ago, people built a structure so precisely oriented to the movement of the sun that it still works today. Modern visitors can stand inside Newgrange on the winter solstice morning and watch that beam of gold light travel slowly down the passage and fill the stone chamber. What does that tell us? It tells us that these people were not just watching the sky. They were tracking it, measuring it, recording it in some way, perhaps in memory, perhaps in systems of knowledge passed carefully from one generation to the next. They had in effect a form of astronomy, a working, practical, precise science of the heavens, developed over generations, refined over lifetimes, built into stone so that it would outlast every individual who contributed to it. And this was at least 5,000 years ago. Likely the knowledge behind it was much older. Let that settle softly in your mind. Those are not simple people. That is not primitive understanding. That is careful observation, carried out over generations, expressing itself in stone. For a moment, just breathe. Notice how quiet it is wherever you are right now. The world outside, so full of noise and light in the daytime, grows still at this hour, and somewhere above you, through the ceiling, through the roof, through the atmosphere, those same stars are still turning. The same stars that ancient eyes watched from open ground thousands of years ago are still there. The sky does not change much. We are the ones who stopped looking. Chapter 8. Numbers and Memory. There is something else that the ancient world left behind, something even quieter and more easily overlooked than giant stone structures, something that fits in the palm of a hand. In 1960, a Belgian geologist exploring a site in what is now the Democratic Republic of Congo, a site called Ishango near the shore of Lake Edward, found a small bone. A baboon's leg bone, to be exact, about 10 centimeters long. On its surface there were a series of notches, carved deliberately, arranged in distinct groups. This bone is now known as the Ishango bone, and it is estimated to be somewhere between 20,000 and 25,000 years old. The notches on the bone are arranged in 3 columns. Researchers who have studied it carefully have noticed that the groupings of notches seem to follow patterns that suggest some kind of numerical awareness. One column contains groups of notches that, when added together, total 60. The groupings include 11, 13, 17, and 19, which are all prime numbers that can only be divided by themselves, and 1. Was this person doing prime number arithmetic 20,000 years ago? We cannot know for certain. The honest answer is that we are not entirely sure what the Ishango bone was used for. Some researchers believe it was a simple tally stick, used to count things, perhaps game animals or days. Others believe the patterns are too specific and too mathematical to be accidental, and that the person who made it had a genuine understanding of numerical relationships. What we can say with confidence is that someone, 20,000 years ago, sat down with a bone and a tool and made deliberate, organised numerical marks. They were counting something. They were tracking something. They were using a system that is mathematics, in its earliest form perhaps, but mathematics nonetheless. And the Ashango bone is not alone. There is the Lebombo bone, found in a cave in the Lebombo Mountains between South Africa and Swaziland. It is a small baboon fibula with 29 notches carved into it, and it is approximately 43,000 years old, one of the oldest mathematical objects ever found. Some researchers have noted that 29 notches correspond roughly to the number of days in a lunar month, and have suggested it may have been a lunar calendar of some kind. Again, this is speculative, but the deliberateness of those marks is not in question. 43,000 years ago, someone was counting. Someone was tracking cycles, possibly the cycle of the moon. Someone was recording information in a physical form so that it could be referred to again and again, rather than just held in memory. That is not just survival. That is science. That is the very beginning of what would eventually become the mathematics and the astronomy and the calendars that all of human civilization is built upon. And it was happening 43,000 years ago. There is something in this that I find deeply peaceful if you let yourself rest in it. The idea that numbers, those clean, quiet, reliable things, have been part of human thinking for so long, that the same simple act of counting, of notching a bone to keep track of something, is a thread that runs all the way from 43,000 years ago to this very night, to the quiet mathematical rhythms of the breathing machines and the digital clocks and the slow counting of heartbeats that happens without any effort, deep inside you while you sleep. Everything is counting, everything is pattern. And human beings have known this in one way or another for a very, very long time. Chapter 9. The First Sailors. Here is something that surprises many people when they learn about it, something that quietly rewrites another part of the simple story we were told. About 65,000 years ago, perhaps even earlier, human beings crossed from what is now Southeast Asia to what is now Australia. This crossing required a boat, or boats, or rafts, some kind of water vessel capable of carrying people across open ocean. Now, 65,000 years ago is a very long time. During the last ice age, sea levels were lower than they are today, which means the distance between Southeast Asia and Australia was shorter than it is now. But even at the lowest point of the sea level, it was never a land crossing. There has always been water between the two land masses, significant water, open ocean out of sight of land. To make that crossing, whether intentionally or accidentally, early humans needed some kind of floating craft. And they needed it at a time when, according to the old simple timeline, we might not have expected them to have such things. But the evidence that they made the crossing is solid. Australia has been inhabited by Aboriginal Australians for at least 65,000 years. That date comes from careful archaeological work at a site called Majid Bebe in the Northern Territory, and is widely accepted by the scientific community. Some estimates put the date of arrival even earlier. These were the first open ocean sailors in human history, and they did it 65,000 years ago. They did not leave behind their boats. Wood does not survive tens of thousands of years the way stone and bone do. So we have no direct physical evidence of those earliest vessels. But the people who arrived in Australia are evidence enough. They got there somehow, and the most reasonable explanation is that they built and used watercraft capable of carrying them across open water. Think about that for a moment. 65,000 years ago, someone looked out at the ocean, at the blue-grey water stretching to the horizon with no land visible beyond it, and decided to cross. And then they built something that could take them there. That is planning. That is courage. That is engineering in its most elemental form. And once they arrived in Australia, they did not simply stop. They spread across the entire continent, from the tropical north to the dry, vast interior to the cool and windy southern coasts, adapting to every kind of environment, developing languages and cultures and knowledge systems of extraordinary richness and complexity. Aboriginal Australian cultures developed some of the most sophisticated ecological knowledge of any people on Earth. Over tens of thousands of years, through careful observation passed down through generations, they developed detailed understanding of every plant, every animal, every geological feature, every seasonal pattern of their landscape. They knew which plants were medicines and which were foods. They knew how to manage the land with fire, a practice now recognised by modern ecologists as a sophisticated and effective form of land management. They knew the movements of fish and birds and animals with precision that no outsider could match, and they encoded this knowledge, not in writing, not in stone tablets, but in stories, in songs, in ceremonies, in the extraordinary oral tradition that kept information alive and accurate across thousands of years. There is a branch of scientific research that has, in recent years, found something remarkable in some of the oldest Aboriginal Australian stories. Certain stories describe events, floods, changes in the landscape, the rising of the sea, that match, with striking accuracy, geological and climatic events that happened thousands of years ago. Researchers in Australia have found stories that may describe the flooding of coastal lands at the end of the last ice age, when sea levels rose significantly, an event that happened between 7,000 and 10,000 years ago. These stories, passed down through oral tradition across hundreds of generations, may have preserved accurate information about geological events from thousands of years ago. That is not just storytelling. That is a form of record keeping, a form of science, a way of carrying true and important knowledge through time, using the human voice and the human memory as the archive. It is humbling in the gentlest way. Breathe in slowly and out again. The night is deep and the world is old, and there is so much more to this story than we were taught. But it is not a frightening kind of more. It is a rich and warm kind of more, the kind that makes the dark feel a little more full and a little less empty. Let your body rest where it is. Let your mind drift with the images, a raft on a silver sea, a figure standing at the shore of an unknown coast, a voice telling a story about a flood that happened 10,000 years ago, and a child listening with wide, tired eyes. Chapter 10. Medicine in the Ancient World. There is something else I want to share with you tonight. Something quieter and closer to home than stone circles and ocean crossings. Something that touches the most personal part of human life, the body, and the desire to heal it. For a long time it was assumed that medicine, real medicine, the kind based on knowledge and care and practical understanding, was a product of the civilized world. Something that developed with cities and writing and formal education. Before that, it was assumed people just suffered through illness and injury and hoped for the best, perhaps mixed in with a few superstitions. But what the evidence actually tells us is something quite different. Across many archaeological sites, researchers have found clear physical evidence of medical practice going back tens of thousands of years, and some of it is remarkably sophisticated. Trepanation is one of the most striking examples. Trepanation is the practice of drilling or cutting a hole into the skull, usually to relieve pressure caused by injury or illness. It sounds extreme, and by modern standards it certainly is a radical procedure. But here is the remarkable thing. Trepanation has been found in skulls from all over the world, going back at least 9,000 years, and in many cases the skull shows signs of healing around the hole, meaning the person survived the procedure and lived for some time afterward. 9,000 years ago, someone performed brain surgery, and the patient survived. This was not random or accidental. Performing trepanation successfully requires knowledge of anatomy, of which tools to use, of how to minimize bleeding, of how to care for the wound afterward. It requires practice. It requires a tradition of learning, passed from one person to the next, that accumulated over time into a working body of medical knowledge. But surgery is only one piece of the picture. Plant medicine, the use of herbs and natural substances to treat illness and injury, almost certainly goes back much further than any physical evidence can directly prove, because plants do not leave the same kind of record as bone. However, there are some glimpses. Pollen analysis at ancient burial sites has sometimes revealed the presence of medicinal plants placed with the body, plants with known healing properties. A famous case from a Neanderthal burial site in Iraq called Shanidar Cave involved the discovery of pollen from several medicinal plants clustered around a body. While the interpretation of this finding is debated, it raises the quiet possibility that even our close cousins, the Neanderthals, may have used plants for healing. Neanderthals. Not modern humans, but a related species that lived alongside our ancestors for a long period and eventually vanished. We now know, thanks to genetic analysis, that most people of non-African descent carry a small percentage of Neanderthal DNA, which means, in the most literal sense, that they are part of us. That the story of ancient intelligence is not only the story of our own species, but of a broader, more complex family of thinking beings. What were the Neanderthals like? They buried their dead, a behaviour that almost certainly reflects some form of belief about death and what comes after. They used tools, they used fire, they created at least some forms of art and personal ornamentation. They were not us, but they were not simple. They were something thoughtful and social and capable of care in their own way. And they are gone now. Gone for about 40,000 years, their world completely dissolved into time, leaving only bone fragments and a small invisible signature in our genes. That is a quiet sadness if you let yourself feel it for a moment. Not a sharp or disturbing sadness, just a soft one. The kind that comes when you think about something beautiful and real that is no longer here. The world has lost many things that were real and beautiful and full of life, but it has also kept so much in the rock and the bone and the painted walls, in the stories that were told so many times they lasted 10,000 years, in the small Neanderthal thread woven into the genetic fabric of billions of living people today. Nothing is entirely lost. It just changes form. For a moment, just breathe. Feel how heavy your eyelids are, perhaps. Feel how the sounds around you have grown softer and more distant. The night is doing what it always does, settling in, deepening, pulling the waking world slowly towards sleep. If you are drifting now, drift freely. The story will carry on around you. You do not need to hold on. Everything we have talked about tonight, the paintings, the stars, the bones with their careful marks, the first sailors on a silver sea, it is all still here, still gently present, like a warm light in a quiet room. Chapter 11. Knowledge across the water. Let us stay on the water for just a little while longer, because there is one more piece of this picture I want to place gently before you, before we reach the end of this part of our journey. For most of recorded history, it was assumed that the great oceans of the world were barriers, that civilizations on different continents developed independently, in isolation, with no meaningful contact until explorers from Europe crossed the Atlantic in the 15th century, that the people of the Americas and the people of Asia and the people of Africa and Europe all grew their cultures separately, like plants in separate pots, until European ships brought them into contact. This picture has been significantly complicated in recent years by a growing body of evidence suggesting that contact across the oceans happened much earlier, and more often than we previously believed. We have already talked about the first Australians who crossed open water 65,000 years ago. But they were not the last ancient sailors to make journeys that seem, at first glance, impossible. The Polynesian peoples, the inhabitants of Hawaii, New Zealand, Easter Island, and the vast network of islands scattered across the Pacific Ocean, are among the most remarkable seafarers in human history. By at least 1,000 years ago, and likely much earlier, Polynesian navigators were making intentional guided voyages across thousands of miles of open ocean, with no instruments as we understand them, no maps as we understand them, no written navigation charts. What they had instead was a deep, intimate, generational knowledge of the sea and sky. They navigated by the stars, memorizing the rising and setting positions of hundreds of stars for different times of year. They read the patterns of ocean swells, which travel in consistent directions across vast distances and can be felt in the motion of the boat long before any land is visible. They watch the flight paths of birds, who travel between islands on regular routes. They read the colour and temperature of the water and the shape of clouds forming over land that was still below the horizon. This was not guesswork. This was a precise, sophisticated science of navigation, built up over generations of careful observation and teaching. Some Polynesian navigators could feel the direction of the underlying ocean swell through the hull of their canoe, even while other waves and winds moved the surface in different directions. They were reading the deep structure of the ocean with their bodies. And using this knowledge, Polynesian sailors settled islands across an area of ocean larger than the entire landmass of Asia. They found tiny specks of land in the middle of the biggest ocean on Earth, intentionally, repeatedly, and then found them again on the return journey. Their boats, the double-hulled voyaging canoes called wakas or wakahurua, were sophisticated vessels, capable of sailing into the wind as well as with it, stable in heavy ocean conditions, and large enough to carry plants, animals, and enough food and water for a voyage of weeks or months. Building and sailing these vessels required engineering knowledge, material knowledge, and seamanship that took generations to develop and refine. This is not primitive. This is mastery. And in recent years, genetic and botanical evidence has suggested that Polynesian sailors made contact with the peoples of South America before any European explorer set foot in either place. The sweet potato, a plant native to South America, was being cultivated in Polynesia at least 700 years ago, well before any European contact. The most likely explanation is that Polynesian sailors reached the coast of South America, obtained sweet potato plants, and brought them back across the Pacific. Imagine that voyage. Imagine standing on the deck of a great canoe, the Pacific Ocean enormous in every direction, the stars overhead, the swell of the deep ocean moving beneath you, and knowing, because you were taught, because your people have always known exactly where you are and exactly where you're going. That is a kind of intelligence that our modern world has almost entirely forgotten how to recognize. We have been so focused on written knowledge, on recorded science, on the accumulation of information in books and databases, that we have sometimes failed to see the profound intelligence that lives in the body, in the memory, in the quiet, deep knowing that passes from a teacher's hands to a student's hands without a word of written instruction. The ancient world was full of that kind of knowledge. In some places it still survives, and everywhere it once existed it leaves a faint impression, like the memory of a dream when you wake, not quite visible, but present, shaping the air. Let us breathe together for a moment. Let the image of that ancient ocean come to rest in your mind. The slow rise and fall of dark water, a sky blazing with stars, a canoe moving quietly through the night, guided by someone who has memorized the heavens and learned to feel the pulse of the sea. You're very safe where you are. The night is calm. The world outside is still. We have travelled far together in this second part of our story. We have looked up at ancient skies and thought about what it means to truly watch the stars. We have held a small bone with 29 careful marks and thought about counting and time and the moon. We have stood at the shore with the first Australians and wondered at the courage it takes to sail into the unknown. We've thought about medicine and Neanderthals and the deep human desire to heal. And we've crossed the Pacific in our minds with navigators who knew the ocean so well it was like a language they had spoken since birth. In the parts of this story still to come, we will go further. We will ask the question again in new places and find new gentle surprises waiting for us there. We will think about what all of this means, not just for history, but for us, here and now, in this quiet night. But for now, let this be enough. Let it settle in you like warmth. You've learned something real tonight, something true, something that makes the past feel a little more alive and a little less distant. The world is old. The people in it have always been wise, in ways both large and small. And tonight, as the ancient stars turn slowly overhead, you are one of them. One of the long, unbroken line of human beings who have lain down at the end of a day and let the dark hold them. We're still here together. We still have more to explore together. More quiet surprises from the ancient world. More gentle evidence that the people who came before us were reaching, always reaching, towards something greater than simple survival. Chapter 12. The city beneath the dust. Imagine a wide, flat plain in what is now Pakistan and northwestern India. The air is dry and warm, the light is golden and low. Somewhere in the distance, a river moves slowly through the landscape. The Indus River, broad and muddy and ancient, one of the great rivers of Asia. And on the banks of that river, or rivers connected to it, there were once cities, not small settlements, not simple clusters of huts. Real cities, with streets laid out in careful grids, with buildings made of fired brick, with systems for bringing clean water in and carrying wastewater out. Cities with public baths, with granaries for storing food, with craft workshops producing pottery and jewellery, and carved seals of extraordinary delicacy. These were the cities of the Indus Valley civilization, also called the Harappan civilization. And they were flourishing, thriving, complex, sophisticated, approximately 4,500 years ago. At its height, the Indus Valley civilization was one of the largest of the ancient world. It covered an area larger than ancient Egypt and Mesopotamia combined. It had dozens of cities and hundreds of smaller settlements spread across a vast region. The two largest cities, Mohenjo-Daro and Harappa, each may have housed tens of thousands of people, remarkable populations for their time. What makes the Indus Valley civilization so quietly astonishing is the level of urban planning and practical engineering it demonstrates. The streets of Mohenjo-Daro were laid out on a grid, straight, organised, intersecting at right angles, with the major streets oriented to the points of the compass. Buildings along these streets were set back at consistent distances, suggesting some kind of city planning or agreed upon standards. Houses were built with standardised bricks. The same proportions used consistently across different cities hundreds of miles apart, which implies coordinated standards or a shared system of measurement. And beneath those streets ran a drainage system. Every house, or nearly every house, was connected to a covered drainage channel that ran beneath the street and carried wastewater away from the living areas. This was not a simple open ditch. These were brick-lined channels with removable covers for cleaning and maintenance. A real, functional sanitation infrastructure in a city that existed 4,500 years ago. For comparison, many cities in medieval Europe, more than 3,000 years later, had no such sanitation systems at all. The streets of medieval London were open sewers, yet the ancient cities of the Indus Valley had covered drains, cleaning access, and what appears to have been a genuine concern for public hygiene built into the very structure of the city. There were also large public baths, the most famous being the Great Bath at Mohenjo-daro, a large watertight tank of fired brick with staircases leading down into the water, surrounded by a colonnaded walkway. It was waterproofed with bitumen, a natural tar-like substance, applied carefully to prevent leaks. The engineering required to build a watertight tank of that size 4,500 years ago was not simple. What were these baths for? Scholars are not entirely certain. Ritual cleansing is one suggestion, given the importance of water in many South Asian spiritual traditions. Public bathing and hygiene is another, perhaps both. But whatever their purpose, they represent an investment of significant resources and engineering knowledge in the well-being and cleanliness of the population. The Indus Valley people also had a writing system, or what appears to be one. Thousands of small seals have been found, made of stone, bone, or fired clay, each carved with images of animals: a humped bull, a one-horned animal that may be a rhinoceros, an elephant, and with rows of symbols above the images. These symbols repeat across many seals, in consistent combinations, in ways that strongly suggest they are a form of writing. But here is a gentle frustration of history. We cannot read them. The Indus Valley script has never been deciphered. No bilingual inscription has ever been found. No ancient equivalent of the Rosetta Stone, written in both Indus script and a language we understand. And so, those symbols, those careful marks carved into small stones 4,500 years ago, remain silent to us. We can see them, we can study their patterns, but we cannot hear them. There is something deeply moving about that. A whole civilization, its thoughts, its laws, its stories, its prayers, whatever it was they wrote on those seals, locked away in a script that no living person can read. A language spoken by tens of thousands of people, perhaps millions, across a civilization that lasted for centuries and now entirely silent. What did they say? What did they write? We may never know. And there is a particular kind of gentle sadness in that. Not a distressing sadness, just a soft and respectful one. The acknowledgement that some things are truly lost, and that the world is large enough and old enough to hold losses of that magnitude without diminishing. For a moment, just breathe. The night is still. The world is quiet. Somewhere, in a museum case in Pakistan or India, a small stone seal sits under carefully controlled light, its symbols still unread after 4,000 years. Patient, waiting. Perhaps not waiting for anything at all, just existing. The way old things exist, with a gravity and a stillness that makes the air around them feel slightly different. Let that thought rest with you, quietly as we move forward. Chapter 13. What they knew about the Earth. There is a question I want to ask now that might seem surprising. It is a question about science, about how much ancient people understood of the physical world around them. We tend to think of scientific knowledge as something that accumulated slowly, mostly in the last few centuries, through experiments and measurements, and the careful building of theory upon theory. And that is true, in a sense. The scientific method as we formally practice it today is relatively modern. The ability to test ideas against controlled experiments, to measure with precise instruments, to share results across a global community of researchers, all of that is recent in the long scale of human history. But the desire to understand the physical world, to observe it, to measure it, to reason about it, that is not modern at all. That goes back as far as humanity itself, and some of the things that ancient thinkers figured out, working only with their eyes and their minds and their accumulated observations, are genuinely remarkable. Let us take one example that I find particularly beautiful. Around 240 BCE, roughly 2,260 years ago, a Greek scholar named Eratosthenes calculated the circumference of the Earth, not the diameter, not an approximate idea that the Earth was round, the actual circumference, the distance all the way around the planet, and he was very nearly correct. He did it with a stick, a shadow, and careful reasoning. Eratosthenes had heard that in the city of Syene, in what is now southern Egypt, at noon on the summer solstice, the sun was directly overhead. This meant that a vertical stick in Siena would cast no shadow at that moment. The sunlight came straight down. But in Alexandria, where Eratosthenes worked, a vertical stick did cast a shadow at noon on the summer solstice. The shadow was small. The sun was nearly overhead, but not quite. Eratosthenes measured the angle of that shadow and found it was about 1/50th of a full circle. From this he reasoned as follows. If the sun is so far away that its rays are essentially parallel when they reach the Earth, and if the angle between Alexandria and Syene is 1/50th of a circle, then the distance between the two cities must be 1/50th of the Earth's circumference. He knew approximately how far apart the two cities were, multiplied that distance by 50, and arrived at his estimate of the Earth's total circumference. His answer, converted into modern units, was somewhere between 40,000 and 46,000 kilometers, depending on which interpretation of his units we use. The actual circumference of the Earth is about 40,000 kilometers. He was right, or very nearly so, 2,200 years ago, using a stick and a shadow and geometry. That is not a guess. That is not luck. That is a mind working carefully and precisely with the tools it has, arriving at a genuine truth about the physical world. And Eratosthenes was not the only ancient thinker to reason carefully about the earth and the heavens. Aristarchus of Samos, roughly 50 years before Eratosthenes, proposed that the earth moved around the sun, not the other way around. This is the heliocentric model of the solar system, the one we know today to be correct. Aristarchus arrived at it through careful reasoning and observation, 1700 years before Copernicus proposed the same thing, and is usually credited with the discovery. Aristarchus was not taken seriously by most of his contemporaries. The geocentric model, the idea that the Earth sits still at the centre and everything revolves around it, felt more intuitively obvious and was eventually formalised and widely accepted by later thinkers. Aristarchus was, for most of history, a footnote, but he was right. There is something quietly poignant about that too. A man who looked at the sky 2,300 years ago and correctly understood the arrangement of the solar system, but whose insight was set aside and forgotten for nearly 2 millennia. The truth was there, clearly reasoned, preserved in text that survived the centuries, and yet it took the world 1,700 more years to catch up. How many other truths have been understood and then set aside? How many correct observations have been made, carefully recorded, and then lost in a fire or a flood or simply in the slow erosion of time? We cannot know. That is the honest answer. We cannot know what was known and then forgotten. But the fact that Aristarchus got there, and Eratosthenes got there, tells us something important about what the human mind is capable of, with nothing but careful observation and clear thinking. It tells us that the tools of science, curiosity, observation, measurement, reason, have always been present in human beings, long before laboratories and computers and research institutions. The mind reaches toward truth. It always has. In every age, in every culture, in every corner of the world where people have had enough time and enough quiet to sit down and think, that is one of the most comforting things I know about being human. Chapter 14, Sleep Reset. If you're still with me, I want to take a moment to invite you to check in with your body. Notice where you are. Feel the weight of the blanket or sheet, if there is one, resting gently on top of you. Feel the pillow beneath your head, soft and still. Feel the slow, steady rhythm of your own breathing. In and out, in and out. Something your body has been doing for your entire life, without you having to think about it, without you having to ask it to. You are so well cared for by your own body. Even now, while you rest, it is doing 1,000 quiet things. Your heart is beating. Your blood is moving. The cells of your brain are reorganizing the day's experiences into memory, filing them away in that deep, vast library that is everything you've ever known or felt or seen. If your eyes are heavy, let them stay closed. If you feel a yawn coming, let it come, wide and slow and completely welcome. It is perfectly fine if you fall asleep now and miss the rest of the story. The story will be here if you want to return to it, but sleep, when it comes, is not something to resist. It is something to welcome. It is the kindest thing you can do for yourself at this hour. The world is safe, the night is gentle, you have done enough for today. If you are still awake and still listening, that is fine too. We will continue softly. The pace will stay slow. The words will stay warm. Take one slow breath. In through the nose, if that feels comfortable. Hold it very gently for just a moment, and then let it go. Slowly, all the way out. Good. Let us drift a little further together. Chapter 15. The Medicine of Plants. Long before anyone wrote a medical textbook, long before any pharmacy or hospital or formal science of medicine existed, human beings were healing each other with plants. This is not mythology. This is not wishful thinking. There is solid, growing evidence that the use of medicinal plants by our ancestors goes back not just thousands of years, but possibly hundreds of thousands. The knowledge of which plants heal and which harm, which can reduce fever and which can ease pain, which can stop bleeding and which can calm an anxious mind. This is one of the most ancient and complete bodies of knowledge that humanity has ever accumulated. And it was accumulated not in books or laboratories, but through experience, through careful attention, through someone, a very long time ago, noticing that chewing on a particular bark eased their headache and telling that to someone else, who told someone else, who told someone else, until that knowledge had travelled thousands of miles and thousands of years to become eventually the discovery by Western scientists in the 19th century that the bark of the willow tree contains a substance called salicin, the natural precursor to what we now call aspirin. The people who first used willow bark did not know about salicin. They did not have names for molecules or understand how chemical compounds interact with pain receptors in the human nervous system, but they knew it worked, and they passed that knowledge down faithfully for a very long time. There are hundreds of examples like this. Quinine, the compound we use to treat malaria, was derived from the bark of the cinchona tree, knowledge that came from indigenous peoples in South America who'd been using it for generations before any European had ever heard of it. Morphine, one of the most powerful pain-relieving substances known to medicine, comes from the opium poppy, a plant whose pain-relieving properties were known in ancient Mesopotamia at least 3,000 years ago. Digitalis, used to treat heart conditions, comes from the foxglove plant, knowledge that was originally held by traditional healers in England for centuries before any physician formally studied it. In every case, the knowledge came first. The plants were discovered, used, refined, passed down by people who had no formal scientific training, but who had something else. They had time, they had attention, they had generations of careful, accumulated observation. In many traditional cultures around the world, the person who held this knowledge, the healer, the shaman, the medicine woman or man, was one of the most important and respected members of the community. Their education was long and demanding. They spent years learning from their teachers, memorizing vast catalogues of plant knowledge, understanding not just which plants to use but when to gather them, how to prepare them, what combinations were safe and what were dangerous. That is a science. It does not look like our science. It does not use our methods or our vocabulary, but it is a disciplined, systematic, accumulated body of knowledge about the natural world, maintained with great care across many generations, and it has saved countless lives. It is only very recently that the broader scientific community has begun to recognize, more openly and more humbly, how much it owes to traditional plant knowledge. Modern pharmaceutical companies spend significant resources studying plants that indigenous communities have used for centuries, looking for compounds that might lead to new medicines. In many cases, the traditional healers already knew the answer. They just knew it in a different language. That kind of quiet, practical intelligence, the intelligence of long observation, of patient accumulation, of knowledge held in the hands and passed through teaching, runs through the entire ancient world. It is not lesser than the intelligence of laboratories and equations. It is different, and in some ways it is more durable. It survived without electricity, without printing, without the internet. It survived on nothing but the human voice and the human memory, for longer than almost anything else in human history. Let that settle softly in you. Chapter 16. The Mathematics of Stone. I want to take you somewhere that sits at the meeting point of art, mathematics, and mystery. A place that raises the gentle question of our whole journey. What if they knew more than we thought, in a particularly beautiful way? The pyramids of Egypt are so famous, so often discussed, that it's easy to let them become a kind of background image, something you know about without really thinking about anymore. But I want to ask you to set aside whatever you already know or have heard about them, and come to them fresh for just a moment. The Great Pyramid of Giza was built approximately 4,500 years ago. It stands about 138 meters tall today. It was originally a little taller, before the smooth outer casing stones were removed over the centuries. At its base, each side is about 230 meters long. The base of the pyramid is almost perfectly square. The difference in length between the longest and shortest sides is less than 8 centimeters. In a base that is 230 meters long, the error is less than 8 centimeters. That is a precision of roughly 1 part in 3,000, achieved 4,500 years ago, with no modern surveying instruments, no lasers, no GPS. The pyramid is also oriented almost perfectly to the cardinal directions, north, south, east, west, with an error of less than 1/20th of a degree. The north face points north with an accuracy that rivals modern surveying. The stones used in its construction average about 2.5 tons each. Some of the larger stones, particularly in the internal chambers, weigh up to 80 tons. There are roughly 2.5 million of these stones in the Great Pyramid. They were quarried, transported, lifted, and placed with a precision that engineers and architects today find genuinely impressive, even by modern standards. How was it done? This is a question that has been asked for a very long time, and it is asked sometimes in an overblown or sensational way, as though the only possible explanation was something miraculous or supernatural. But the honest answer is this: we do not know the precise methods in full detail, and that lack of certainty does not need to be filled with fantasy. What we do know is that the ancient Egyptians were sophisticated engineers who had a deep understanding of geometry, of mechanics, of how to organize large human workforces efficiently and effectively. They had ramps, levers, sledges, and an enormous pool of organized labor. They had surveyors and architects and planners who had spent their careers mastering these techniques, and they built the greatest single stone structure in human history. But here is the detail I find most quietly compelling. In the proportions and measurements of the Great Pyramid, mathematicians and historians have found several relationships that seem to echo mathematical constants. The ratio of the pyramid's perimeter to its height is very close to 2 times pi, that is 2 times the number approximately 3.14159, the ratio of a circle's circumference to its diameter. This relationship is close enough that some researchers believe it was intentional, that the Egyptian architects knew about the relationship between pi and circles and built it into their most important structure. We cannot be completely certain this was deliberate. It is possible it arose naturally from the use of a measuring wheel, a device that could have been rolled to measure distances and would, by its nature, introduce the ratio of pi into measurements. But whether accidental or intentional, it suggests a mathematical sophistication that we might not expect from a society 4,500 years old. And the Egyptians were, in fact, sophisticated mathematicians. Ancient Egyptian mathematical texts that have survived, including the Rhine Papyrus and the Moscow Papyrus, show that Egyptian mathematicians could calculate the area of a circle, the volume of a cylinder, and the slope of a pyramid with methods that are remarkably practical and effective. They worked with fractions in a system quite different from ours but equally valid. They solved algebraic equations, though not in the symbolic form we use today. They were doing mathematics, real, working, practical mathematics that allowed them to build things that still stand. And they were not alone. At approximately the same time in Mesopotamia, the region of modern Iraq, Babylonian mathematicians were solving quadratic equations, calculating compound interest, creating sophisticated astronomical tables that could predict the positions of the planets years in advance. The Babylonian understanding of astronomy was so precise that later Greek astronomers drew heavily on their centuries of observations. In ancient China and ancient India, mathematical traditions were developing independently that would eventually give the world crucial tools, including the concept of zero, possibly the single most important idea in the history of mathematics, which emerged in India and profoundly changed what calculation was capable of. Zero. The number that represents nothing, and by representing nothing, makes infinite things possible. The number without which modern computing, modern physics, modern everything would be essentially impossible. It came from an ancient mind sitting with a problem, noticing that something was missing from the number system, and giving that missing thing a name and a symbol. That is a remarkable act of thought. A thought so good it changed the world forever. For a moment, just breathe. Let the images settle. The pyramid rising in pale morning light. A scribe bending over a papyrus, working through a problem with a reed pen. A Babylonian astronomer watching the sky from a high tower, making notes by firelight. A mathematician in India staring at a problem and seeing for the first time the shape of nothing. These are not primitive images. These are brilliant ones. These are human beings at the fullest expression of their minds, reaching toward the same things we reach toward today: clarity, precision, understanding, truth. We have more in common with them than we usually allow ourselves to feel. Chapter 17. The Quiet Map. Here is one more quiet surprise before we close this part of our journey. Maps are one of those things that we tend to think of as a relatively modern invention, or at least a product of the organised, literate civilizations we know best, like Rome or medieval Europe or the great Islamic empires of the Middle Ages. But humans were making maps long before any of those civilizations existed. The oldest map we have found so far is a small clay tablet from Mesopotamia, about 5,000 years old, that shows a river valley with hills on either side and some text identifying features of the landscape. It is simple, but it is unmistakably a map, a representation of physical space seen from above, created to convey information about where things are. But even before that, there are other intriguing pieces of evidence. In the cave of Lascaux in France, the same caves we visited in our very first chapter, with their magnificent animal paintings, there are also some abstract markings that some researchers have interpreted as possible star maps, showing the positions of prominent star clusters. This interpretation is debated and not universally accepted, but if correct, it would mean that at least some of those Paleolithic cave artists were also mapmakers of a kind, recording not just the landscape of the Earth, but the landscape of the sky. There are also rock carvings in various parts of the world that seem to represent landscape features, mountain ranges, rivers, valleys, seen from above in a way that would be recognizable to any modern cartographer. Some researchers believe these represent an early form of spatial mapping, a way of recording and sharing information about the environment in a form that could be understood by others. And in many traditional cultures, particularly those of indigenous peoples who did not use writing, maps existed in other forms. Mental maps, held in memory with extraordinary precision, passed down through navigational teaching. Story maps, encoded in oral tradition, where a journey is described so precisely that someone who has never made it can follow the description and arrive safely. Song maps, used by Aboriginal Australians and some other cultures, where a sequence of song or chant contains the navigational information for a journey, describing landmarks, water sources, and directional cues embedded in the words and melody. These are maps. They just exist in a different medium than the paper and screen maps we are familiar with. The purpose is the same: to share spatial information, to help someone find their way, to preserve knowledge of the landscape across time and distance. The human need to understand and represent space, to stand somewhere and say, here is where we are and there is where we're going, is ancient and universal. It is built into the way our brains work, into the way we evolved as creatures who needed to know our landscape to survive in it. And so wherever there have been humans, there have been maps, in stone, in clay, in bark, in memory, in song. The shapes and materials change, the purpose never does. We are, all of us, descended from people who knew their way around, who read the landscape with their eyes and their feet and their memory, who could look at a hillside or a river bend and know exactly where they were. That knowledge is still in us somewhere, quieter now, less necessary perhaps, but still there. Like an old song you half remember, like the shape of a path you walked a long time ago before you knew it by name. We have come a long way tonight, in this third part of our story. We have stood in the planned streets of Mohenjo-Daro and felt the quiet engineering of a civilization that knew how to keep its people clean and healthy 4,500 years ago. We have thought about Eratosthenes and his stick and shadow, and the joy of a mind that can measure the world with so little. We have walked through ancient pharmacies made of forest and field, full of plants that carried healing in their leaves and bark and roots. We have stood before the Great Pyramid and let its precision rest in us as a reminder that human intelligence is not new. And we have thought about maps, all the different forms they take, and the ancient quiet need to know where we are. In the part that follows, we will begin to slow down, not in the sense that the story becomes less rich, but in the sense that we will spend more time reflecting, more time sitting with what we have found, more time letting the warmth of these ancient discoveries settle into something that feels, perhaps, like comfort. Because that is what this story is really about in the end. Not just facts and dates and remarkable discoveries. It is about the comfort of belonging to a long, long story. About the reassurance of knowing that human beings have always been capable, always been curious, always been reaching toward beauty and truth and understanding, no matter where they lived or when. You are part of that story. Your mind working through these ideas tonight is the same kind of mind that painted horses on cave walls and measured the earth with a stick and built cities with drains and sailed across the Pacific by starlight. You are not separate from those ancient people. You are their continuation. That is a warm thought to carry into sleep. The world turns slowly, and so do we. Rest now if you're ready, or stay a little longer if the night still has room for more. The story will be waiting, it always is. The night has grown very deep now. The kind of deep that belongs only to the hours just before morning, when the whole world seems to have finally agreed to be still. If you have been with this story since the beginning, you have travelled a long way. Through painted caves and ocean crossings, through stone cities and ancient mathematics, through the quiet intelligence of plants and the brilliance of people who measured the earth with shadows. If you're just arriving or returning after drifting away for a while, welcome back. There is no catching up needed. Just settle in. Let your body rest where it is resting. Let your breathing be slow and natural. This part of our journey is going to feel a little different, a little softer, a little more like sitting by a fire at the end of a long walk rather than setting out into new territory. We will still explore. We will still find beautiful and surprising things, but the pace will slow. The reflections will grow longer. The spaces between ideas will grow wider and more restful, because we are getting close to the end now, and endings deserve their own kind of quiet. Let us begin. Chapter 18. The Thread of Memory. There is something I have been thinking about throughout this whole story that I want to share with you now more directly. Everything we have talked about, the cave paintings, Göbekli Tepe, the first sailors, the stone circles, the medicine of plants, the pyramids, the unread script of the Indus Valley, all of it has one thing in common. Every single piece of evidence we have looked at is a fragment of something much larger, a small surviving piece of an enormous whole that is mostly gone. Think about what it means that most of human history has left no direct trace at all. Things made of wood rot, things made of cloth decay, things made of plant fibre, animal skin, feather and bone and grass and bark and every soft material that human hands ever worked with. Almost all of it is gone. The things that survive are the exceptions. The stone tools and the fired clay and the carved bone and the painted walls, deep in caves where the air is cold and still. These are the accidents of preservation, the small fraction of a fraction that happened to survive the enormous weight of time. What was lost? Everything made of wood. Every boat, every house, every piece of furniture, every carved figure, every tool handle, every piece of clothing, every bag, every net, every rope, every painting done on anything other than stone, every song, every story, every prayer, every name. All of that is simply gone. And yet we have found enough to know that those people were remarkable. We have found enough to feel quite clearly the intelligence and creativity and care that shaped their world. From the fragments, the small, cold stone fragments, we can feel the warmth of the whole. That seems important somehow. That the evidence, even in its incompleteness, is enough to show us something true. That truth has a way of leaving marks even when everything around it disappears. I think about the person who carved those geometric patterns on a piece of ochre 73,000 years ago. We have only the ochre. We have nothing else about that person. Not their name, not their face, not the sound of their voice, not a single word of their language. But we have the pattern, and the pattern tells us something essential. It tells us that this was a mind that saw order and meaning in abstract form, a mind that wanted to make something beautiful, or meaningful, or both. That is enough to know them a little, to feel them a little, across 73,000 years of silence. Memory is a strange and stubborn thing. It finds ways to persist that we do not always expect or plan for. The ochre was not meant to last. It was just a small piece of stone that someone marked and then set aside, perhaps meaning nothing particular by it beyond the moment. And yet here it is, across an almost incomprehensible distance of time, still holding that mark, still showing us something true about who was here. For a moment, just breathe. Feel the weight of your own body, resting and real. You are here, you are real. And somewhere far in the future, something of you will persist too. Not necessarily anything physical, but the ripples of your presence, moving outward through the people and the world around you, past the point where any one trace of you is visible. That is not a sad thought. It is a very gentle and peaceful one, if you let it be. Chapter 19. The Intelligence of Cooperation. There is one aspect of ancient human capability that I have not yet talked about directly, and I want to spend a little time with it now, because in some ways it may be the most important of all. Every remarkable thing we have looked at in this story, every stone circle, every ocean crossing, every city with its drains and its baths, every pyramid, none of it was done by one person. All of it was done together. Human beings are, above almost everything else, cooperative creatures. Our ability to work together, to coordinate, to share knowledge and effort and resources across large groups. This is the deepest source of our capability. Not individual genius, though individual genius certainly exists and matters, but the collective intelligence that emerges when many minds and many pairs of hands work toward a shared goal. This cooperative ability is itself ancient. It goes back further than agriculture, further than cities, further than writing. It is built into us at a very deep level. Researchers who study hunter-gatherer societies, both those that existed historically and the few that still exist in some forms today, have consistently found that these communities are characterized by remarkable levels of sharing and cooperation. Food is shared widely, not hoarded. Knowledge is shared freely, not guarded. Care for children, for the elderly, for the sick and injured. These are community responsibilities, not individual ones. This is not idealization. These communities also had conflicts and difficulties, like every human community. But the baseline orientation is cooperative. The default setting, shaped by hundreds of thousands of years of evolution in small interdependent groups, is to help. And this cooperative intelligence, this ability to share knowledge, to learn from each other, to build on what the generation before figured out, is what allowed ancient humans to accomplish things that no individual could ever have accomplished alone. Think about Göbekli Tepe again. 12,000 years ago, a group of hunter-gatherers organised themselves into a workforce capable of quarrying, transporting and erecting enormous stone pillars with extraordinary precision. This required a level of social coordination that we might not expect of people without cities or governments or formal institutions. But they did not need formal institutions to cooperate. They needed trust. They needed shared purpose. They needed a common understanding of what they were trying to achieve and why it mattered. And they had all of those things because human beings have always been capable of creating them wherever they are and whenever they live. The same cooperative intelligence that built Göbekli Tepe also maintained the oral traditions that preserved accurate historical memories for thousands of years. It organised the trading networks that moved obsidian and shells across hundreds of miles. It equipped the voyaging canoes of Polynesia with the knowledge of 100 generations of navigators. It kept the medicinal plant knowledge alive through countless transfers from teacher to student, hand to hand and voice to voice across uncountable generations. Cooperation is not just a social nicety. It is the engine of human achievement. It always has been. And here, in the quiet dark of this late night, you're participating in a small version of that ancient cooperative exchange. Someone gathered knowledge and shaped it into words, and those words travelled through various forms of technology to reach your ears. And you received them, thought about them, let them become part of your understanding of the world. That is a chain of sharing that goes all the way back to the first time one human being showed another how to do something, or told them something they did not yet know. You are part of that chain. You have always been. For a moment, just breathe. Let your body sink a little deeper into rest. Let the warmth of that thought settle around you like a blanket. You're not alone in this night. You're part of something very long and very warm. Chapter 20. The Lost Cities. I want to talk now about something that sits in that gentle middle space between solid established fact and intriguing open question. I want to talk about it carefully and honestly, the way I have tried to talk about everything in this story. There is a persistent idea in archaeology and in public imagination that there may have been, at various points in the deep past, civilizations or organised societies that were more advanced than the ones we currently know about from that period, and that have left little or no trace because they were destroyed by natural catastrophe or because they existed in places we have not yet fully explored. This idea is sometimes taken to extreme, sensational directions that go far beyond any evidence, and I want to be clear that we should not follow it in those directions tonight. There is no solid evidence for the kind of dramatically advanced lost civilization that some popular books and television programs have proposed. We should not claim more certainty than the evidence allows, but there is a genuine and serious scientific conversation happening about whether the timeline of human civilization is more complex than the standard story suggests, and some of that conversation is quite compelling. Here is one piece of it. At the end of the last ice age, roughly 12,000 to 10,000 years ago, sea levels around the world rose significantly. The great ice sheets that had covered large portions of North America, Europe, and Asia melted. The water had to go somewhere. It went into the oceans. The sea level rise at the end of the last ice age was substantial. Estimates vary, but the global sea level rose somewhere in the range of 100 to 120 metres compared to the Ice Age minimum. 120 metres. That is an enormous amount of water, and here is the implication that some researchers find very significant. Before that sea level rise, there was a great deal of land that is now underwater. Coastal areas, river valleys, sheltered bays and estuaries. Exactly the kinds of places where early human communities tended to settle. Fertile, food-rich, temperate environments near water. If any relatively advanced communities existed in those coastal areas during the Ice Age, and the presence of Göbekli Tepe at 12,000 years ago suggests that sophisticated human organisation was certainly possible at that time, then the evidence of those communities may now be sitting under 100 metres of seawater. Archaeology underwater is possible. We have found sunken cities and sunken ships and submerged artefacts in various places around the world. But systematic exploration of large areas of the continental shelf, the relatively shallow undersea areas that were once dry land, is extremely difficult and expensive. We have barely begun. There are, in various parts of the world, tantalizing hints of structures or formations beneath the water that some researchers believe may be artificial, made by human hands. Most of these are debated, and many have turned out to have natural explanations upon closer examination. But the honest scientific position is that we have not fully explored these areas, and we cannot be certain what we might find. This is not a claim that there were lost super civilizations with impossibly advanced technology. It is simply the acknowledgement that a significant portion of the world where early humans could have lived is now underwater, unexamined, and that we should be humble about how complete our picture of the ancient past really is. Humility in the face of the unknown is not weakness, it is honesty, and honesty, in the presence of something as old and complex as human history, is the only appropriate response. The past is bigger than we know. That is not frightening. It is wonderful. Let that settle in you softly. Chapter 21. What time really feels like. I want to take a step back from specific discoveries now and spend a little time with something more abstract. Something that I think is at the heart of why this story matters, and why it is a good story to fall asleep to. Most of us, in our daily lives, experience time as a relatively short thing. We think in terms of days and weeks and years. We plan for months ahead, and we remember things from years ago. Our sense of history might stretch back to grandparents and great-grandparents, perhaps to some famous events from a few centuries ago. And beyond that, history starts to feel abstract, too big to really picture, more like a concept than a felt reality. But the story we have been telling tonight asks us to stretch our sense of time much further than we usually do. To feel, not just know, but feel what it means for something to have happened 10,000 years ago, or 50,000 years ago, or 200,000 years ago. And the most honest thing I can say about this is, we cannot really do it, not fully. The human mind did not evolve to feel deep time in a visceral way. We evolved to pay attention to the immediate world around us, the seasons, the years, the generations we actually live within. Deep time is something we have to reach for, intellectually, rather than something we can simply feel, but there are moments when something of it gets through. When you stand in front of a very old thing, a very old tree, a very old building, a very old piece of bone in a museum case, and you feel something that is not quite a feeling you have a name for. A kind of vertigo, maybe. A sense of the ground shifting slightly beneath ordinary certainty. That feeling is the beginning of understanding deep time, the moment when the intellectual concept starts to translate into something felt. And when it does, it often brings with it a particular kind of peace, because deep time puts everything in proportion. The things we worry about, the small daily anxieties and frustrations and concerns that feel so urgent when we are inside them, they look very different from the perspective of deep time, not unimportant exactly. Our lives and our feelings are always important because they are real and they are ours, but smaller perhaps in a way that is comforting rather than dismissive. We are very small in deep time, and there is something restful about that. The ancient people we have been thinking about tonight lived their whole lives, everything they loved and feared and hoped for, in a world that is now so far gone it is almost invisible to us. Their worries are over, their joys are over. Everything that felt urgent and immediate and real to them has passed into that great stillness where all things eventually go. And yet they were here, they were real. Their hands made things that lasted. Their minds reached toward truth and beauty. Their care for each other echoes faintly in the structures of the societies we live in today. They mattered, even though their time is over, and we matter too. Even though our time is also passing, slowly, day by day, season by season, and will eventually pass completely. This is not a sad thought, held in the right way. It is a freeing one. You do not have to hold on so tightly to everything. The world is old and will go on being old long after the particular worries of this particular night have dissolved into the past. You can put them down for now. You can rest. The world turns slowly, and so do we. Chapter 22. The Children of the Ancient World. Let us think for a moment about the children. Every civilization we have talked about tonight, every culture, every community, every group of people who built something remarkable and left something behind, they all had children. Small, soft, curious human children who were loved and cared for and taught. The children of the people who painted the caves. The children who grew up in the shadow of Göbekli Tepe, perhaps playing among the great carved pillars before the site was buried. The children of Mohenjo-Daro, who splashed in the water channels and ran through the wide streets. The children aboard the Polynesian voyaging canoes, who fell asleep on the ocean and woke up still moving through a world of water and sky. Every one of those children was taught. They were taught the knowledge their community had gathered, the names of plants, the movements of stars, the stories of their people, the skills of their craft. They were held in arms and shown the world. They were soothed when they were frightened. They were fed when they were hungry. And they grew up, and they taught their own children, and those children taught theirs, and the knowledge moved forward through time, changing slowly, accumulating slowly, passed from body to body and voice to voice, in an unbroken chain that stretches all the way from the first human beings to you, lying here in this quiet night. You received that inheritance. All of us did. Every piece of knowledge we have, every language we speak, every skill we practice, every story we know, all of it came from someone who learned it from someone who learned it from someone, in a chain of teaching and sharing that goes back further than any record we have. You are the current end of a very long line. The most recent person in a chain of people that began somewhere in Africa, hundreds of thousands of years ago, and has never broken. Not through ice ages, or floods, or droughts, or disease, or any of the 1,000 things that could have ended it. It never broke. That is the most remarkable thing in this whole story, when you really sit with it. That the line of human life and human knowledge and human care that connects you to the very first people has never, not once, been completely severed. Every generation found a way to pass something on to the next. Every generation kept the thread alive. You are that thread, continuing. And tonight, resting in the dark, you're doing what every person in that line has done at the end of their day. You're letting the world go for a while. You're trusting the night to hold you. You're giving yourself over to sleep, which is the oldest and most necessary thing any living creature does. Rest well. You're in good company. You have always been in good company. For a moment, just breathe, in and out. Feel how natural it is, how effortless. The body knows how to do this. It has always known. Chapter 23. The Slow Revolution. Before we move into the final part of this journey, I want to spend a little time with one last idea. An idea that brings together many of the things we have been thinking about tonight. The story we were taught in school had a certain shape to it. It was a story of progress, of humanity moving forward in a straight line from simple to complex, from ignorant to knowledgeable, from primitive to advanced. And in this story, the direction of travel was always clear: forward, upward, better. But the evidence we have explored tonight suggests a more complicated and in some ways more interesting picture. Human beings have not moved in a straight line. The history of human capability is not a simple slope going steadily upward. It is more like a vast, slow, irregular landscape, with peaks of remarkable achievement appearing in unexpected places and times, followed by periods of loss and forgetting, followed by rediscovery, followed by new peaks in new places. Knowledge has been gained and lost many times in human history. Libraries have burned, civilizations have collapsed, oral traditions have been disrupted and destroyed, whole languages have gone silent. Entire bodies of carefully accumulated understanding have simply disappeared from the earth, leaving at most a faint impression in the archaeological record. The knowledge of how to sail by swell and star across the Pacific was nearly lost when traditional Polynesian voyaging declined in the 19th and 20th centuries. It survived, partially, through a small number of practitioners and has been revived in recent decades through dedicated effort. But it came close to being gone forever. The medical knowledge of thousands of traditional plant-based healing traditions around the world is under constant pressure from the homogenization of global culture. Every time the last speaker of a language dies, or the last practitioner of a traditional knowledge system passes without a student to receive it, something real is lost. Something that took generations to build and cannot easily be rebuilt. This is not a reason to despair. It is a reason for humility and for care. The past tells us that knowledge is not automatically cumulative. It does not automatically build on itself forever. It requires people who value it, who take the time to learn it and teach it and carry it forward. It requires communities that believe certain things are worth knowing, worth preserving, worth passing on. And when we recognize that ancient peoples possessed deep and genuine knowledge, not just charming folk wisdom, but real, tested, sophisticated understanding of the world, then we begin to see the knowledge they left behind in a different light, not as quaint remnants of a simpler time, but as genuine contributions to the human conversation about how to live in the world. The person who first used willow bark for pain relief was doing something real. The navigator who memorized the positions of 300 stars and could feel the direction of the deep ocean swell through the hull of a canoe was exercising a genuine and sophisticated intelligence. The architect who designed Newgrange so that a beam of winter solstice light would travel down a long stone passage to illuminate a chamber, that person understood geometry and astronomy and the movement of the earth through space, and they expressed that understanding in stone. These things matter. They were always real, and they deserve the same respect and wonder that we give to the achievements of modern science. Perhaps more, because they were accomplished with so much less, in conditions so much harder, by people who had to figure out so much from the very beginning. Let that thought rest softly in you. The people of the ancient world were not less than us. They were not waiting for us to arrive and show them how to be intelligent. They were already intelligent, already curious, already reaching. In ways both large and small they already knew. We are somewhere close to the end of this long and gentle journey now. One more part remains, and it will be the softest part of all. The part where the words grow fewer and the spaces between them grow longer. The part where we let everything we have thought about tonight settle slowly into something quieter than thought. But before we go there, let me invite you one more time to check in with your body. Notice where your hands are resting. Notice the rise and fall of your chest with each breath. Notice the warmth of wherever you're lying or sitting. Notice the sounds around you, whatever they are, however soft or distant. You're here, you're real, you're resting. The ancient past is very far away and very quiet, and somehow it is also very close, in the shape of your skull and the precision of your hands and the restless, reaching quality of your mind, which even now, even as sleep approaches, is still wondering, still curious, still gently alive. You are what all of that history was moving toward. Not as a destination exactly. The story does not end with you any more than it ended with any generation before you, but as the current expression of something very long and very deep and very human, Rest now. Let the night hold you. We have one more chapter together. It will come gently, like the last few waves before the tide turns. The world turns slowly, and so do we. We are nearly at the end now. The night has done its work. The world outside is as quiet as it ever gets. And if you have been here since the beginning, since the first soft words, since the open plain and the distant fire and the question about what ancient humans really knew, then you have travelled a very long way. You do not need to hold on to any of it. Not the names, not the dates, not the details. Let it all rest loosely in you, the way a dream rests when you first wake from it. Present but not gripped. Real but soft at the edges. This last part of our journey is not going to ask much of you. There is no new complexity coming, no sharp ideas to follow, just a slow, gentle walking back toward stillness, toward the quiet centre of a late night that has been good and full and is now ready to be over. Come with me, just a little further. The path is soft from here. Chapter 24, Everything That Endures. There is a quality that runs through every remarkable thing we have talked about tonight. Something they all share, beneath the differences of culture and time and geography. Every painted cave, every carved bone, every stone circle, every voyaging canoe, every city built with care and precision in a dry valley thousands of years ago. They were all made with love, not love in the romantic sense necessarily, but love in its older, quieter sense, the deep attention and care that a person gives to something that matters to them, the willingness to take time, to be precise, to do the thing properly, even when roughly would have been sufficient. The person who painted the horses at Lascaux did not have to make them beautiful. They only had to make them recognisable, perhaps, if the purpose was practical, to record the animals that lived nearby, to teach young hunters what to look for. But they made them beautiful. The lines are fluid, the proportions are observed with care, the animals seem to move. That is love. That is human being giving their full attention and their full skill to something, because it mattered to them, because beauty mattered, because doing it well mattered. The builders of Newgrange did not have to make that passage align with the winter solstice sunrise with such precision that it still works 5,000 years later. They could have been approximately right, but they were exactly right. They took the time, spent the effort, cared enough to get it exactly right. That is love. That is the same impulse that makes a person take extra care with something they are making for someone they care about. The extra attention that turns a thing from adequate to excellent. And the navigator who memorized 300 stars and felt the pulse of the deep ocean through the wood of a canoe, they did not do that casually. That took years of devoted learning, years of sitting with teachers, of practicing in all weathers, of making the knowledge so deeply their own that it became part of how they moved through the world. That is love. That is complete, committed devotion to a way of knowing. All of human achievement, not just the ancient kind, but all of it, across all of history and up to this very moment, is made of this, of attention, of care, of the willingness to take something seriously and give it what it needs. And it endures. That is the extraordinary thing. The love that went into a painting made 40,000 years ago is still visible in the painting. We can feel it across the enormous distance of time. We can stand in front of those horses and feel the aliveness in the lines, the care that shaped them, the presence of the mind and hand that made them. Love, expressed through careful making, outlasts everything else. Outlast the name of the maker, outlast the language they spoke, the world they lived in, the specific hopes and fears that shaped their days. What remains in the end is the quality of attention, the evidence that someone was fully present, fully caring, fully there. that is what endures. For a moment, just breathe. Let that thought move through you slowly, like warm water, like the first light of morning before it is fully light yet, something quiet and good and real. Chapter 25. The shape of a human life. Every person we've thought about tonight lived a complete human life. That seems like an obvious thing to say, but I want to sit with it for just a moment because I think it is easy to think of ancient people as figures in a story, rather than as real, full, complicated human beings who experienced everything that being human involves. The artist who painted the cave walls at Lascaux had a childhood, learned to walk, learned to talk, had a first memory that they could not quite explain, was frightened of something in the night once when they were young, was loved by someone, lost someone, had days that felt long and days that went too fast. The architect who designed Newgrange had a favourite time of year. Perhaps they loved the winter solstice in particular, the turning point, the day when the dark begins to retreat and the light begins, slowly, to return. Perhaps that is why they devoted so much of their skill to capturing that moment in stone, because it meant something to them personally, because they wanted to make the return of the light visible and certain and permanent. The Polynesian navigator had a teacher they admired deeply, someone who showed them, for the first time, how to feel the swell direction through the hull of a canoe, and whose face they probably thought of every time they used that skill for the rest of their life. The mathematician in ancient India who first gave form to the concept of zero sat with a problem for a long time before the answer came. And when it came, there was probably a moment of pure, quiet joy. The particular joy of understanding something that had not been understood before, of finding the right shape for an idea that was true. These were real people, tired at the end of their days, glad of warmth and rest, grateful perhaps for exactly the kind of quiet that you're resting in right now. They are gone. Their specific selves, their faces and voices and the particular texture of their inner lives, all of that is completely gone, dissolved into the deep past without any trace we can access. But they were here. They were as real as you are, as present and particular and alive as you are in this moment, breathing in this quiet room. And their work is still here. The painting is still there on the stone. The passage at Newgrange still aligns with the winter solstice. The concept of zero is still the foundation of every calculation happening on every computer on Earth tonight, including the one carrying these words to you. Their lives mattered, their work persisted, and in that persistence something of them persists too. Not their identity, but their quality, their care, their reach. That is a kind of immortality, small and quiet and anonymous, but real. And perhaps that is enough. Perhaps it is more than enough. To do something with care and have it outlast you, even if no one ever knows your name in connection with it. To contribute something real to the long human conversation and then let it go. That is enough. You breathe in, you breathe out. The night is very still. Chapter 26. A thought about sleep. Ancient people slept differently than most of us do today. This is a small thing perhaps, but I find it quietly wonderful. Before electric light, before any artificial light bright enough to significantly extend the working day, the rhythm of human sleep was shaped almost entirely by the sun. When it went dark, the world went dark, and people slept. But they did not necessarily sleep in one long unbroken stretch the way many of us try to. Research into historical sleep patterns and studies of people in communities without electric light have found a different pattern. People would often sleep for a few hours after dark, what some researchers call the first sleep, and then wake naturally in the middle of the night. They would be awake for an hour or so, quiet, still. Sometimes they would talk softly with whoever was nearby. Sometimes they would think or pray or simply lie in the dark with their thoughts. And then they would drift back into a second sleep, lasting until morning. This in-between waking, this quiet, dark middle hour, was considered perfectly normal. Not insomnia, not a problem, just a natural part of the night's rhythm. Some historians have found references to this pattern in old texts, in the writings of people from the medieval period, who described this first and second sleep as simply the natural way of things. The time between the two sleeps was sometimes called the watch, or the watching, a word that carried the sense of quiet, attentive presence in the dark. I find something deeply comforting in this. If you're lying awake right now, in the middle of the night, perhaps this is your watching hour. Your own ancient, natural, middle-of-the-night wakefulness, doing exactly what it has always done, holding you gently in the quiet dark, giving you a little space to think and breathe before the second sleep comes. You do not need to fix this. You do not need to force sleep. You can simply be here, in the old way, in the way that humans have been here in the middle of the night for as long as there have been nights and humans to lie in them. The second sleep will come. It always does. For a moment, just breathe. In, slow and full. And out again, all the way, easy and complete. Chapter 27. The Long View. If you pulled back far enough to see the whole of human history at once, the way you might see a landscape from a high place, what would it look like? It would look like an enormous, slow flowering, a process that began in small and quiet ways in a particular part of the African continent, with a particular kind of primate that had developed an unusual brain and an unusual degree of social connection, and then spread. Slowly at first, then faster again, until it covered the entire surface of the earth. Everywhere it spread, it left marks, paintings and carvings and structures and graves. Middens, the archaeological word for ancient rubbish heaps, which are in many ways more revealing than monuments, because they show what people actually ate and used and discarded in their daily lives. Seeds and pollen and animal bones and plant fibre and microscopic traces of fire. Everywhere, marks. Everywhere, evidence of presence, of minds working, of hands making, of communities caring for each other and building things together and reaching, always reaching, towards something more than mere survival. And running through all of it, through the paintings and the mathematics and the medicine and the navigation and the stone circles and the unread scripts, there is a single quality that seems to define us more than anything else: curiosity, the desire to understand, to ask why and how and what if, to look at a thing and want to know more about it than the surface shows, to look at the sky and want to know what it is, not just accept that it is there. This is the quality that, more than any other, seems to separate us from every other species we know about. Other animals are intelligent. Other animals cooperate, communicate, use tools, show something that looks like emotion, and even something that might be culture. But the particular restless curiosity of the human mind, the desire not just to navigate the world, but to understand it, to map it, to represent it, to ask questions about it that have no immediate practical application, this seems to be distinctively, deeply ours, and it goes back a very, very long way. To the first person who looked at the marks on a stone and wanted to make marks of their own, to the first person who watched the stars move and wanted to understand the pattern, to the first person who took a plant that eased their pain and thought carefully about how it worked and where to find more and how to prepare it. Curiosity was there at the very beginning, and it has never stopped. It is in you right now. Even here, Even in the deep late night, something in you is still curious, still turning these ideas over gently, still wondering, still present. That is one of the most beautiful things about being human. The curiosity does not sleep, even when we do. Let it rest now, just for a while. Let it be still. Let the wondering settle into the background, like music that has become so familiar you stop noticing it consciously, but it is still there, still playing, softly. Chapter 28. Coming Home. We started tonight on an open plain, a wide sky, a low fire, a group of people sitting together in the warm dark, and we have wandered far from that beginning, through caves and cities and oceans and mathematical texts and star maps and buried temples and the bones of very old knowledge. But now I want to bring us back to that plain, back to that fire. Sit with those people for a moment. In your mind, they are still there, in the way that the past is always still there if you close your eyes and reach for it. The fire is low. The sky is enormous. Someone is talking softly. Someone else is almost asleep, chin dropping toward their chest, breath slowing. One of them looks up at the stars. You've seen those stars too tonight in a way, not with your eyes, but with your mind. You know a little more about them now, perhaps. You know that people have been watching those same stars for a very long time, that they have built things to honor them, navigated by them, measured time by them, incorporated them into their understanding of who they were and what their world meant. The stars do not care, of course. They are enormous and distant and indifferent in the way that only very large and very old things can be. But the watching matters. The caring matters. The fact that human beings, small and temporary as we are, have looked up at those enormous indifferent lights and found meaning in them, that matters. It says something about us that is worth knowing, that even in the presence of something incomprehensibly vast and old, we do not give up, we do not turn away, we look harder, we try to understand, we build things that point toward the truth of what we see. That is extraordinary, and it is ancient, and it is still happening right now, tonight, on every continent on Earth, in every community and culture, wherever there is a mind that is awake and wondering. You are part of that. You have always been part of that. Come back to the fire now, sit down in the warm circle, let the conversation grow quieter around you. Let the fire sink a little lower, let the stars continue their slow turning overhead, the same stars they have always been, in the same sky, above the same earth that has held every human life that has ever been lived. You are held, you are safe, the earth is old and steady beneath you, the night is soft, the fire is warm. Chapter 29. The last gentle thought. I want to leave you with one last quiet thought before we let the story go. Everything we have looked at tonight, all the remarkable things that ancient people did and knew and made, none of it happened because those people were superhuman. None of it required abilities that we do not also have. It happened because they paid attention, because they had time and quiet and the willingness to observe the world around them with patience and care, because they passed what they learned to the people who came after them, faithfully, for generations, because they cooperated and shared and built on each other's understanding. These are not superhuman qualities. These are ordinary human qualities. Attention, patience, care, generosity, the willingness to teach and to learn. You have these qualities. Every person does, somewhere in them. And in the age we live in now, an age of so much noise and speed and distraction, of so many things competing for attention at every moment, these qualities are harder to exercise than they used to be. But they are still there. They did not go away. They have not been lost. They are waiting quietly under the surface of everything, Every time you slow down enough to notice something carefully, the shape of a cloud, the taste of something simple, the particular quality of light at a certain time of evening, you're doing what the ancient painters and navigators and stone circle builders did. You're paying attention, you're being fully present to the world, and that is not a small thing. That is the root of everything. Tonight in this quiet, you have done a version of that. You have been still. You have listened. You have let ideas move through you without rushing or grasping. You have been, in some small way, present. That is enough. That is more than enough. The people who painted the caves were not trying to change the world. They were trying to be in it fully, to mark their presence, to say, in the only way available to them, I was here. I saw this. I thought it was beautiful. And here we are, 40,000 years later, still moved by what they made, still seeing it, still finding it beautiful. I was here. I saw this. I thought it was beautiful. That is the whole story, really. All of human history, condensed to 3 sentences. Every civilization and every discovery and every remarkable thing that human minds have ever done. It is all just a variation on those 3 sentences. We were here, we saw the world, we thought it was beautiful, and now, for tonight, the seeing is done. The thinking can rest. The beauty will still be there in the morning, patient and unchanged, waiting for you to find it again with fresh eyes. Let your body be heavy. Let your thoughts grow soft and slow, like the last light of a fire that has burned long and well. Let the images from tonight, the painted horses, the stone pillars, the ancient oceans, the winter solstice light moving down a stone passage, let them drift and blur and become something less like thoughts, and more like the texture of a dream that has not quite arrived yet. You are safe. The night is good. The world is old and you are part of it, connected by an unbroken thread to every person who has ever lain down in the dark and trusted the night to hold them. They were held, and so are you. Breathe in, slowly, all the way, and out. All the way, easy, complete. The world turns slowly, and so do we. Sleep well, sleep deeply, sleep without worry. You've been a wonderful companion on this long and gentle journey through the ancient world. Thank you for listening. Thank you for wondering. Thank you for being here in this quiet night, part of the long and beautiful story of what it means to be human. The fire is low, the stars are still, the plain is wide and peaceful and very, very old. Rest now. Everything is well.